Okay, good morning. It's really a pleasure to welcome Dorion Sagan to this forum, as well as a well-celebrated author and thinker that we have cherished for many years in our research team, close to our minds and heart for many reasons, in close proximity to Lynn Margulis, through their contributions to the understanding of the origins and evolution of life, sex, and death, but especially sex. Dorion has been at the forefront of ecological theory, explaining symbiogenesis as a force of evolution, of course, but also bringing forward conceptual ideas to decenter the human presence in this planet by reminding us to worry but not to despair, as we consciously or unconsciously favor the establishment of the Cyanocene era. He's an author and co-author of more than 25 books, which have been translated in many languages. He's increasingly influential within both academia and popular culture. He's regularly cited by feminist theorists, anthropologists, environmentalists, and drug liberation advocates. He gives conferences all over the world, and his work has appeared in many newspapers and magazines, such as Natural History, Smithsonian, Wired, the New York Times, the New Yorker, etc., many others.
Not the New Yorker, no.
Okay, I'll stop there and just say gracias, Dorion. We are honored to have you as part of our 20-year celebration at the Apolab, and you're welcome now to give any presentation you want to share with us.
It's my pleasure. So I'll see people's faces afterwards, because I don't see anybody but you.
So you should see them now.
Oh, now I do. Okay.
Here we are. This is the whole lab. You can see that some of them are masked because they are in the infrastructure. Right now, we have to work in the lab with masks. People that are not within the lab are not wearing a mask.
Como banditos.
So, and you'll get to hear from them. They will introduce themselves a little bit later in the event.
Okay,
Welcome, Dorion. Welcome. Thank you so much for accepting.
Muchísimas gracias a usted, Jean-Philippe. No puedo, lo siento, pero no puedo dar esta charla, esta conferencia en español, pero para no parezca como un gringo completo, quería decir algunas frases primeramente en español, okay? Okay, now I switch to English. Thank you very much for having me. The title, as you know, is The Tiger, the Sex Act, and Promiscuous Bacteria Towards a General Theory of Sex. Chocolate, vanilla, velvety roses, rosy flesh, drunken orgies fostered by Bacchus, the god of wine, or by Dionysus, the god of holy dissolution, and alcohol, one of our planet's oldest metabolic byproducts. Whether quick and dirty or extended by long courtship, whether with real flowers or walks in the woods fragrant with actinobacteria, or in an email as a lover uses punctuation marks to make a pictograph of a rose with fragrant semicolon thorns. Sexual reproduction and its sequelae are central to our existence. Primate evolution occurred in a bed of plant sex, of angiosperms, and meiotic sex remains at the core of our deeper animal being. Indeed, meiotic sex can be considered an author of our animal being. According to the French writer and renegade philosopher Georges Bataille, the sexual act is in time what the tiger is in space. Of course, to a scientist, the words, the sexual act, may seem wildly imprecise. Bataille seems to be referring to sex among humans. But humans are only one of an estimated 30 million extant species, representing less than 1% of all the species that ever have been on Earth. Protistologists suggest that our kind of sex, meiotic sex, which as you know, involves an alternation of cells and bodies, and their chromosome numbers evolved multiple times. We have sex. Tigers have sex. Limex maximus have sex. These hermaphrodite gray slugs hanging down from trees on long mucus threads mutually insert their penises up to 10 centimeters long in each other before climbing up those same mucus cables or falling to the forest floor, perhaps in ecstasy. Lesbian lizards in all female populations in the Southwest United States have sex, producing more eggs when they rub against each other, although there are no males around. A book was even written suggesting that based on the matrilineal contribution by mothers of their mitochondria to the next generation, we can expect the eventual loss of men, as it would be better for the selfish genes of mitochondria. That seems unlikely, in part because sexually reproducing organisms fill Earth's most biodiverse ecosystems. Sex also sometimes occurs between members of separate species, for example, donkeys and horses, leading to sterile mules. But wild sex acts occurring outside bodies in invertebrates may also sometimes lead to fruitful unions. It need only happen in a million years, once in a million years, literally. According to the late invertebrate zoologist Donald Williamson, external fertilization, sex between flying insects and onychophorans, may have led to metamorphosing butterflies. And marine invertebrates, such as starfish with wildly distinct larval and adult forms, may have originated from sex between sperm and eggs of different species. Clams, starfish, and sea urchins cast their sperm and eggs into the sea. According to Williamson, hybridizations occurred between sea cucumbers and starfish and sea urchins and brittle stars, transferring larval forms found among these echinoderms. Life is wild. It is wild in its actions and desires. As Bataille suggests, the sex act, like the tiger, is the result not of scarcity, but its opposite, excess. In Paris, in 1929, Bataille had read Soviet geochemist Vladimir Vernadsky's book, translated into French as La Biosphère. It grabbed him. The book argued that life, especially green life, was in essence a kind of mineral, a transformation of sunlight. Living matter, with its solar-derived energy, exerted pressure, spreading outwards and into itself. If the Gaia hypothesis argues Earth is alive, Vernadsky collapsed the difference between life and non-life from the other direction, considering living matter as a geological force. For Vernadsky, crystallographer and mineralogist, who brought into currency the term biosphere, life was an impure form of water, a moving solar-energized mineral. To Vernadsky, the movement of trucks, weapons, and airplanes in World War I resembled biblical swarms of locusts and flocks of birds, other parts of Earth's surface that had countered Earth's gravity with the transformed energy of the sun. As well known in the Soviet Union as Darwin in the Anglo-American world, Vernadsky reconstructed our view of life, treating it as an astrophysical phenomenon in space, much as Darwin, with evolutionary theory, expanded our view of life in time. You can see the influence of Vernadsky's views on Bataille. The tiger, a compact of musculature, claws, teeth, speed, beauty, and animal intelligence, is, like the sex act, made possible by the excess of energy provided by the sun. Life, including the tiger in space and sex in time, is a solar phenomenon. But Bataille's claim that life's greatest problems are caused not by lack but by excess may not be exactly right, especially for the origins of our kind of meiotic sex. Here it would appear that Bataille was wrong. Not excess, but privation, lack, was crucial. The meiotic kind of sex that produces sperm and ova seems to have been due to sequences of events spurred by extreme hardship. Not excess, but starvation, or rather, desperation, desiccation, and starvation that led to accidental fertilization, which was followed by excess, growth in a doubled state. Before reproductive sex had evolved, growth in this state, growth ultimately caused by solar excess, spurred its own problems. Today, we inhabit, or rather are, diploid bodies. As best we know, our sense of individual identity vanishes along with these bodies. In the meantime, though, we produce and release sex cells, sperm and ova, which are haploid. They have only one set of chromosomes. They look remarkably like distinct varieties of primeval protists. Indeed, if a man died mysteriously and a person was shown a medical police lineup of suspects with, say, Euglena gracilis, a hypermastigote, Stentor coeruleus, Mixotricha paradoxa, and Plasmodium, along with a sperm and egg, he or she might not even realize that the last two had belonged to a human body. Although the biological world is wild, most organisms on Earth still reproduce asexually. Biologically, sex may be defined as the transfer of genes from one organism to another, now a recombined being. By this strict definition, most so-called sex acts are not necessarily sex, as no genes need be transferred from one body to another. But our common use of the word sex refers not to genetic recombination among beings, but to the common behaviors with which acts sometimes leading to fertilization are associated. For example, nudity. Nonetheless, sex as defined here is rampant. Bacteria trade genes via plasmids conjugation, for which discovery Joshua Lederberg, who would later work at NASA and coined the term exobiology to describe the search for life beyond Earth, won a Nobel Prize in 1958. Bacteria have sex, and bacteria are masters of non-reproductive sex. They can trade from a few to almost all their genes, conferring traits in the process. Indeed, if they had been discovered first on Mars, they might have been considered a radically different life form. But of course, they are not. They are our ancestors. If we could do what they do, a boy with brown hair and eyes might jump into a pool with a Dalmatian and a green-eyed girl and come out with green eyes, spots, and the ears of a dog. But this is not reproduction. Two people went into the pool, two people came out. There is no reproduction. Reproduction is the formation of a new organism, and in us, this occurs by reduction division, that is, meiosis, the production of haploid sex cells with one set of chromosomes, which, fertilized, create a new sexually reproduced individual, a zygote with two sets of chromosomes. Incorporating genes from two parents is indeed sex. But getting them from a virus or a bacterium or even vaccine also qualifies as sex, bacterial-style sex, in this strict definition. The biological world is wild, and science is part of it. From an evolutionary point of view, we can see that bacterial-style sex evolved first and is not directly connected to reproduction, while protist sex evolved later and became linked and necessary to the life cycles of organisms like us, animals with embryos. Protist is a name for unicellular protoctis. Protoctis or protistans include multicellular eukaryotic clones or colonies that are neither plant, animal, nor fungi. It was in these organisms that our kind of meiotic reproductive sex must have evolved. Reproductive sex evolved in the protoctis, the protistans, but they remain understudied because of their relative lack of commercial value. Nor are protoctis explicitly recognized in the genetically reductionist Woesian three-domain taxonomy. But it is clear that these were the sort of cell ancestors in which animal sex evolved. In moments of intense passion or menstrual or ovulation pain, Mittelschmerz, we return to our tiny forebears, our haploid ancestors. Sex, in a sense, returns us to the past. Early protists would have had only one set of chromosomes. Something happened. Defining sex as genetic recombination to produce new beings and reproduction as the production of new living beings helps us clarify the difference between these two connected and sometimes tightly allied processes, sex and reproduction. They are tightly coupled in us, but not in our prokaryotic ancestors. The distinction also helps us focus on the unexpectedly alien character of the promiscuous bacteria whose planet we share. Although Berge's manual, following Linnaeus, gives bacteria genus and species names, my late mother, biologist Lynn Margulis, argued that bacteria do not have species at all. According to the most cited definition of species, Ernst Mayer's biological species concept, a species consists of a population of organisms that can breed fertile offspring with one another. But this zoocentric definition doesn't apply to bacteria. They don't sexually reproduce, so they don't form true species. Rather, as the parasexual elements that join symbiogenetically into nucleated cells, bacteria created speciating organisms, the protists, the protoctus. On this view, archaeans and bacteria are non-speciating, and there is no such thing as bacterial extinction. The promiscuous prokaryotes trade genes but reproduce asexually, and they trade genes with abandon. Real species diverge or become extinct. They don't. They are more like a planetary superorganism or a global internet of trading genes. They do not speciate themselves, but speciation evolved in their symbiogenetic descendants, the protists, the first cells with nuclei, the eukaryotes. All life on Earth is polygenomic except for the bacteria. The modular basis of the biosphere is prokaryotic. We are one of their many experimental dying forms, but bacteria are needed to close the biogeochemical cycles and to run the ecosystems that make life possible for us and others. With many sorts of metabolism, they cycle atoms of carbon, sulfur, phosphorus, nitrogen, and other elements essential for nucleic acids and the proteins of bodies. They do not speciate themselves, but invented eukaryotes that do. They are our planetary elders, and their sexual and parasexual acts, especially their deeper than sexual acts of symbiogenesis, are at the core of our being. They, and also I would say ancient protists, make us who we are. The aliens we've been looking for in space are right here on Earth. They are our ancestors. They created us, they are us, and they inhabit us. In a sense, we are their sexual, and through protest, their meiotic reproductive sexual creations. And although prokaryotes don't need to have sex to reproduce, they have sex all the time, including right now, in all likelihood, in or near one of the newly estimated 37 trillion cells in your body. So that is the first part of my lecture, which I neglected to mention, is called What is Sex? Now,
so anyone has questions that we'll ask Dorion, you can just go ahead and ask it first.
Me. Hi, Dorion.
hi.
It's a really great pleasure to meet you. My name is Mariana. And thank you so much for such amazing talk. I have one question. I know that maybe you mentioned it in some way during your talk, but I would like to know, in your own opinion, what is the real scale at which endosymbiosis contribute to establish the sexual reproduction and its evolutionary success?
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite understand what you said.
Okay, maybe a little bit more slowly.
Yeah.
In your own opinion,
Yes.
what is the real scale at which endosymbiosis contribute to establish the sexual reproduction?
To what extent, in this, what is the scale of the extent to which symbiosis contributes to sexual reproduction?
To establish the sexual reproduction and its evolutionary success.
That's a very broad question, and you probably know way more about it than I do. I mean, the only thing that I think of is that you know, well, first there was this worldwide bacterial style sex with viruses, and then you know you got the ancestor to the organelles coming into the eukaryotes that included at least an archaean host and ancestors to mitochondria, and then ancestors to plants, to chloroplasts, and according to my mom, some other mysterious deeper element that was responsible for the like cytoplasmic motion and architecture, including microtubule organizing centers and meiosis and mitosis. And she thought they were spirochetes, so she was open to another thing, but they would have been so ancient that, and there was no direct smoking gun DNA sequences that that still has not been accepted, but in her mind that was a huge difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and it looked like they would have been responsible for the evolution of mitosis and then meiosis, partly because like other symbionts they would be reproducing on a different timetable. So it would be more easy for there to be things like the origin of meiosis, because when they separated before the cell did, you would be able to divide the chromosome number. So they would have been very important in that way for the origin of eukaryotic sex. Of course, symbiosis is itself a parasexual process, and it's a kind of permanent sex. So there's a lot of different ways you can go. It reminds me of something I recently read about Freeman Dyson, who died this year in 2020, and he was an astrophysicist who was talking about how you can make bridges between scientific fields, and he said they often in astrophysics talk about symbiosis, so galaxies swallow each other, and he said you can see the bone, it's like the bones inside of a snake, the mouse bones inside of a snake. When these galaxies swallow each other, you can see the remnants of the other galaxy inside of each other. And he talked about that as an example of bridging between sciences. And that makes, when I read that and thought about it a little bit, it makes me think of the little bridge they show in bacterial sex, which is, a form. So there's a lot of different directions you can go with that question, if I even understood it correctly.
No, I think you got it, Dorion, but bringing it to your own, to the talk you just shared, bringing the question to the talk you shared, perhaps it would be fair to say that you would favor sex over sexual reproduction in terms of the impact.
Oh, yeah.
Symbiosis.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, well, it seems strange though that sexual reproduction is so prevalent, and even that it's so particular that it evolved multiple times. And I wonder, what's going on if that's the true story? What's going on with the origin of chromosomes before sex? But I think as a global process, I think that, yeah, from my mother's perspective, I mean, the bedrock of the biotectonics, if you like, of life on Earth is more bacterial sex. And all of the things that we think are great and what we associate with life, even if we're not so anthropocentric, we tend to be zoocentric. Those are all sort of experimental forms that are not needed to run the ecosystems, because they don't all they do is respire, and some photosynthesize, but the plants already did that and a lot more. And they did it in part by being able to adapt so quickly by trading genes to like alter their metabolism almost immediately. So, they already had it done, and this is all sort of like the show after the show. We're in the after party.
I'm Dulce. I'm a master student in the Apolab. Finishes now. Well, my question is, in your opinion, why is that life does not comply to the second law of thermodynamics? Could it be related to the reproductive capacity of living organisms?